Thank everyone for being here. I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes to talk about how I'm just going to talk about things I'm exploring since many years, mainly around how data and technology can help us build better cities and buildings. But to start with, I just want to quickly tell you who I am and how I got here. I'm a trained landscape architect who went into urban design 12 years of my first half of my career. And being a landscape architect in urban design, I kind of figured out, I ended up working on very large projects, and I figured out that stuff is complex and complicated and takes a lot of time. And you can have the greatest design in the world if you don't really know how to communicate it well, if you don't have a good narrative, it most likely won't go very far. And so 12 years ago, I joined Squint Opera to create narratives that help these long-term, large-scale projects to kind of evolve and survive. So a bit of kind of safeguarding the project through a strong narrative. 8 years ago, working at Squint, we decided to move from a kind of linear rendering pipeline to a real-time pipeline, meaning we started to play around with game engines and putting our projects into game engine environments. And this was really the beginning of us exploring this idea whether you could virtually test your physical projects before you build. And this work kind of brought me into the next question, which was, so what are we actually putting into those simulations, and what kind of information do we feed these systems with? And I really very strongly believe that at this moment in time, it was never more important to really think about the underlying intent that you have and the data that we put into those simulations, because that actually will influence the outcome of those simulations. So looking back at almost 3 decades working in the built environment, I figured that what I really spent most of my time with was trying to forge collaborations between different disciplines. And in the end, I maybe spent most of my time building trust between different entities or different people. Trust in complex environments at this intersection of transparent processes and a lot of murky processes that we deal with on a constant basis. I believe that most of the decision making is really driven by personal agendas and opinions. And even though I think that it's extremely important to have a diverse discussion and diverse opinions, it would be nice if we have some sort of common ground where we meet, a starting point, a common understanding of the basics of our world. And in this context of our current struggles, I mean, we're still struggling to build buildings or cities that are energy neutral or carbon neutral. But really, the aim or the end goal is to build places that are productive. And today we're kind of happy if the built environment is not bad for us, but really where we should be aiming for is to create environments that are positive, that are good for us. So if you zoom out a tiny bit, I think just to give some context, there's some sort of technical progress that is constantly evolving, and then people have ideas. And sometimes they match the progress and sometimes they don't. And then there's some sort of larger socioeconomic context that we act in. So if you zoom into the next 3 to 5 years, what we are seeing is a convergence of different technologies that come out of gaming, advances in machine learning, and automatic robotics. And this convergence is really fundamentally changing we collaborate and interact. It's changing the way we design, build, and operate our buildings and cities. And another kind of big picture context is, if you think about how we educate people at the moment, or how we run our professional practices, or how we run our cities or countries, what we have done is we kind of put everything into neat boxes, and then we hired the best people to run those departments, and then we optimized in a linear fashion. And a while ago we realized, these things are actually all interconnected, and actually this diagram should actually maybe look a bit more like this. We have to move towards a circular, regenerative way of collaborating. In reality, I think the diagram maybe looks a bit more like this, because the truth is that everything is kind of interconnected and quite complex around us. And another view I like is this kind of ecosystemic framing. When you start to look at, from outside in, the kind of global and local challenges and needs, governance and citizen models, finance and business models, methods of creation, our urban systems, and our methods of operation. What I like about this illustration is that it kind of reminds me that we have to prototype and test, in a small scale, and then grow from there. But principally, I think we are at this moment in time. We have massive challenges, and we really need to radically rethink and update all our processes and systems. So that led me to this question: whether we could actually create this shared baseline understanding. How can we actually create the most apolitical, the least biased understanding of our world? And this is especially important because we are starting to feed these AI systems with all this information, and whatever we feed into them, will have an effect on the outcome. So we really have to very clearly articulate what our end goal is. What is it we're actually trying to achieve? And the other kind of positive, if we would manage to create some sort of baseline understanding, then it would ease our collaborations, and we would have something that we could measure our progress against, right? At the moment, it's pretty much opinion-driven. So what information do we put in our digital simulations? And what are our shared values? If I take a wild guess, right, we would have discussions around efficiency, minimizing waste, reducing the need for energy. We would talk about resilience and resilient systems and inclusive systems, and everything has to be a good experience for everyone. There has to be some sort of cultural framing in most cases, and it would be nice if those systems are kind of creating some sort of accountability. And since we will get it wrong, let's just think of them as iterative systems that we have to constantly adapt and change. So once we have articulated our shared values and goals, we look at the data to kind of double-check our assumptions, whether we're on the right track or not. But when we do that, we realize that most information we have really exists in kind of many disparate, unstructured, unvalidated data sets. So it's a complete mess, and we're really far, far away from having this kind of one federated, structured, validated data set to start from. So what we have a lot of is raw, unprocessed data, facts and figures without any context. And then if we would contextualize this data would turn into information. And so suddenly this could describe things like how, what, or where, or when. And then we add to this information insight, and it becomes knowledge. And this interpreted data of kind of relationships, if you like, allow us to know how and understand why. And then the next step after this, after we have done what we said, if you then add meaning to all of this, we get closer to the wisdom realm. And then we start to understand, what maybe the best options are that we have to explore. But as I said, we're far way from being at that last stage. And then, in reality, this is an iterative cycle where we have to always go back, and it will influence how we collect data and what we actually collected. So the reason why I think it's so important for us to come together and articulate our vision and trying to really express what we're trying to achieve is because all the data that we put in is fundamentally political. There is no neutral data. It always comes tinted with your underlying intent. So whether you go into design process, you start by, it will influence what kind of data do you collect, how you federate your data, how you interpret it, how you run your simulations, how you optimize everything, and in the end, what kind of data we put into those AI training sets. But this also is important for the next phases, when we go into construction or operations. So how can technology help us? How can it help us, augment us to become better designers and planners? I'm just going to quickly talk about 6 trends. Maybe one thought first around AI. So there is basically 3 things. So AI, principally, I think of as a language. It's a new language that we all have to become literate in. At the moment, there's maybe 2 main discussions going on. There's a kind of philosophical discussion whether it can at some point match or even outpace our intellectual capabilities. And then there's a more kind of practical one, which is what you see all of what's happening today is maybe better described as an advanced information processing. It's a kind of advanced statistics, if you like, that we are currently developing. But it's a powerful tool, right? But at the moment, most of the use cases that you see, someone has a really complex problem or looks at a really complex problem space, and we're looking to AI to generate this one answer, which is a really reductive way to use these averaging algorithms. And it's good in some cases, but generally speaking, I think we should turn the binoculars around and really use it the other way around to show us a whole array of possibilities. And it's really about the system inspiring you and prompting you to think, prompting you to create. And so this more expansive view, I think at this moment in time where the development is maybe one that should be explored more. But the 6 trends, I start with the one that's maybe the most familiar. We use generative AI to get inspiration. You can create millions of options of something that you are developing to get inspired and to find the right thing. It's kind of a playful tool which can turn a bit of scrambled paper into a sketch for a building or an empty line drawing into an illustrated plan. And that's interesting, and why not? But the other bit, which I think is important if we're dealing with these complex integrated systems, is to really use artificial intelligence or AI systems to help us predict future outcomes. So the predictive analysis space is something that I think we should all pay close attention to, because it will help us navigate this really complex reality that we are in. So companies like NVIDIA's Omniverse is trying to figure out how to visualize these things, and companies on the right, like Infrared, they spent 3 years training an algorithm on learning the outcome of environmental simulations, and now it can guess the outcome in real time. And so while you are designing, you basically get the instant feedback, right? I think of these as layers that you can switch on and off as you are designing, right? You don't want to always know what your environmental impact is or your energy consumption or whatever it is, but if you want to, it's there, right? And you can just switch them on and off, and they run in the background, some sort of ambient compute layer. So the other useful trend, I think, is our ability to simulate the way stuff will look and feel like, so we can experience it. And the reason why I think it's important is because I believe that we humans are all amazing spatial sensors. You walk into a space for the first time, you walk down a road for the first time, you instantly have a feeling. It feels good or it feels bad. And this ability in some way, I think, means that the success or the failure of every build project gets decided the moment people step into it and they experience it. And so why not use that ability that we have to kind of virtually test something before it's actually built? There's obviously limits to that. It's not a one-to-one possibility, but we're getting pretty close in tricking our body into thinking that we're actually in that place and actually feeling it. The other thing that you would add to this stack of layers is virtually testing the economic performance and the environmental performance in addition to the experiential performance. So these are systems that are supporting your design decisions, as you are designing, you get that live feedback. And why is that important? I think if you look at a generic timeline for any kind of build project, we all know that it becomes much more expensive to change stuff later in the process. And so our ability to change anything really rapidly declines after the concept design phase is over. And so that's really the moment when you want to tap into those virtually testing your design and tap into those tools. I think it's also good to look what's happening outside of our industry. So if you look into what's happening at the moment at NVIDIA, NVIDIA is building systems. They're basically simulating factories in all their components, meaning all the components, all the steps, all the human movement, all the robotic movement is simulated in a 3D environment. And then they use this environment to optimize every process, the human and the robotic processes, and they train the robots in that environment so that they can get deployed without any further training needed. So that just gives a hint to where this is going. The next trend that I think is important is this question around how can we actually involve non-technical people in the design process. If you look about, I'm talking about urban planning, the earliest or one of the nicest tools I think around is a project that started 2017 at IAC. It's an app that runs on an iPad or a mobile device where there's a really simple kind of 3D representation of your project, and you can engage with people and talk about scenarios. And it's not only kind of playing around with scenarios and figuring out where a bench goes or whatever, but at the same time they're also capturing feedback, while you're engaging with those non-technical people. A bit more recent, there's an example from ZHA. They just launched this island in Fortnite, which is really to be understood as an open sandbox. So at the moment, the only tiles in that sandbox are Zaha's tiles, but in theory, any one of you could build their own island, copy this island, build your own, put your own tiles in, put your own algorithms in, and use that as a tool. So the hope, I think, is that this will help to democratize the planning process. And I really feel that we always have missed a trick because public participation was rarely taken seriously, and we kind of we ignored the tacit value that is actually trapped in everyone that lives in a place. We all feel, we all know what we like and what we don't. We can't articulate what it is, but we have to find ways to get to that information, I believe. And this is behind the background that, just as a reminder, that it's obviously a constantly iterative process. So we start iterating in the digital space, and then you keep iterating, once it's built, if that's possible. Another component of that is in some way, I think we are still communicating spatial design like this. We have 2D plans and 2D sections to communicate a 3D experience, a spatial experience. The client is not very engaged, and the interns in the back are tired. But a lot has changed since then. So advances in spatial computing and in game engines and streaming technology, and also organizational changes in the C-suite. Now we have chief digital officers and chief information officers on your client side, right? So all of these things 8 years ago meant that Squint Opera went into building these virtual experience twins, where we federate all the data from often hundreds of companies into one real-time model. Everybody who works on a project gets federated into one real-time model, and then from that model, you can generate any kind of experience you would need to either virtually test or literally whatever you need, you can create from that. It's also a really good communication tool because now you have something you can talk to your board about or to your investors. your design teams, any other stakeholders, across the whole project timeline. So we start building those simulations at a conceptual phase and all the way to the end. At Squint, like many good projects, it started as a in-house project because we had a need. We had a project at Empire State Building, building the visitor experience, and it was difficult for our designers to understand each and every touch point. And so we built everything in real-time 3D, and they were able to test different design options, different content options virtually. And then the client saw it one day, really loved it, and we did all the reviews with him from then onwards in the same simulation. Today, every project at Squint starts with building these real-time simulations. This is Peak Tramway, where we would mock up, like a rough mock-up of what the experience will look and sound like. And you get pretty close to how it actually will be. We use the same tool for remote design reviews, or you can have it as a backdrop on a stage setting or in an exhibition context. Right? It's all, or a lot of times we also use it as a backdrop for making films. Right? So once you have that 3D asset, you can do all these things. Right? So it's an extremely valuable asset at the end of the day. But this fifth point is really about the fact that we are just at the beginning of this transformation. This is day one. And it's really about learning, and it's about sharing. So I'm supporting IAC in a new new postgraduate course, AI for architects and the built environment. But there's more and more popping up, every month at the moment in that domain. But the kind of AI assistance, at the end of the day, is really about having access to insight that will help us to make better decisions in the process. There's many tools. I'm sure many of you have tried some of them. I think every month there's new ones. I really like Urban AI. They have give a good overview of what's happening. And at Cornell Tech, the Jacobs Institute at Cornell Tech have a website called urbanai.org, which also is a good starting point to figure out what's out there and what you want. My point is that the reality that we are in is really complex, and everything is interconnected. And so if you think about tools, what's most important for me is that we're looking at tools as things that are focused on interoperability to create a modular stack. You don't want to be trapped in a proprietary pipeline, and you want open access. You want your data, your information to flow in and out at any given time. And obviously, they should be transparent and safe, and you should own your information. You should own your data. You shouldn't give it to a company. Lastly, is my favorite trend, actually. I think there is a possibility to use artificial intelligence to engage with and give agency to non-human actors. So I do believe that focusing purely on kind of human-centric design is kind of what got us here. So it's maybe good to expand our view a little bit and think about what does that mean for the natural world, and what does it mean for animals and plants, but also the soil, the air, water, all of these non-human entities, I think, will have a voice in these future planning processes. You can see in some countries like the Netherlands, regulation is already changing, and it's required actually to have someone on your planning team on a larger urban design project that represents the non-human world. My favorite project was a research project a while ago called Trees AI, which was trying to really map the value that trees bring to an environment beyond just the carbon sequestering, but also what the impact is on biodiversity, on groundwater, on soil regeneration, air quality, whatever it is. This led to a platform called GUS, which is currently used by a bunch of cities in Europe, actually, to, on one hand, simulate and project the future value of tree plantations, but also to monitor the impact. So this is deeply rooted in science. It's a very interesting project, and it's the first of its kind, I think, which shows a direction of travel. I believe that we're going to see more and more tools like this that are really focused on giving non-human entities agency in the design process. Lastly, I also think that all our business models have to change, because what AI means is that we really can't keep charging for time and material. What we have to get to, I think, is much more an outcome-driven model, but that's maybe for another talk. In a perfect world, we would also forge global collaborations to address existential risks, champion regenerative frameworks, construct governance models that harness collective wisdom, commit to 100% regenerative human presence on planet Earth, drive intergenerational wealth creation, recognize human-generated data as an extension of identity, and foster a culture of innovation and embrace new tools and ideas. So let's align incentives, adopt long-term investment logic, change the way we manage risk, evolve the way we measure success, share knowledge, team up and co-create solutions to improve all our processes and systems. And all of this, for a more inclusive, more regenerative, better experience for all. We have to move from a linear to a circular way of thinking, and from short-term to long-term, and from closed software systems to open software stack. I think now is the time to listen and learn from each other, because it's complex and complicated, and I think we have a lot to figure out. So let's all, form alliances and foster cross-disciplinary understanding, which will create empathy, which allows us to co-create some of those solutions that we need, solving some of the wicked problems that we're facing at the moment. Here's a list of companies that I collaborate with. So if anyone ever wants to talk about any of those things, from whether you want to create a virtual experience twin or build your own bespoke AI model, or education, whatever it is, I'm here, and I'm super happy to always have a conversation. Lastly, I just want to share my top favorite books I read in the last year. Again, happy to share more and talk more. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jan. Mind-boggling.
Mind-boggling indeed.
But you're not a designer.
I am a trained landscape architect. I used to design.
Well, I wanted to go to that subject because just to bring it full circle, when you were studying landscape architecture, were you already kind of about the wild and the wonderful, or were you doing sort of neatly cut trees and espaliers, beech tree avenues and that kind of thing?
I grew up.
Let's go back into your landscape taste.
Yeah. I grew up in a really dysfunctional hippie commune, so I was definitely not cutting trees into boxy shapes. But what I did is I started a collective, which is still around, where we were kind of annoyed with this notion when we were trained at the Technical University in Berlin, and the notion still was that there is this one designer that has the brilliant idea, and but then when you start engaging with those complex projects in landscape architecture, you realize that it's really not possible for one person to cover all domains, right? There's so many components within that. And so I teamed up with 4 friends, and we had this really ambitious idea that we would design together. It was 4 headstrong designers sitting on one piece of paper with 4 pens, and we would discuss every move we made. And for some reason, we were very successful and won lots of competitions. and that was the beginning. It was kind of at the time when when this whole idea of master planning changed. It was Kees Christiansen, really, I think, who introduced this idea of flexible master planning, where you would design a core, a structure, an empty shelf, and then you would let with a bunch of simple rules, and then you would let stuff happen within these boundaries. So it's kind of always has been my work as a landscape architect, I think, always has been around finding the right balance between the structure and the freedom that you allow.
So your days growing up in the hippie commune were sort of similar. It was a paradigm for what you later came to believe in professionally, that people could work much better by being on an equal level without the hierarchy of the boss. Most architect practices have a named figure who has sort of basically invented the agenda. But you, from the outset, wanted it to be a collaborative process, which perhaps could lead to arguments or compromises. I mean, there were, in art world terms, there is a mistrust in decisions made by committees.
Same. I have
Would
the same.
you see it the same thing?
Yep.
That we're not talking about committees,
Nope.
though, are we? What's the difference between a committee and one of your
I think it's a level of
entities?
It's a level of knowledge that you bring to the discussion, right? You have to kind of qualify to be a part of. If
Lots of
complex.
committees would feel that
And that
the people participating
it is
are well educated,
Absolutely.
perhaps too well educated for that committee.
100%. I think it is a blurry line. I think there is actually something really good to listen and to get inspired and not to outright dismiss everything that comes from the outside. But if you're dealing with very complex interdependent dimensions where you have to worry about your water security and your food security and on a master plan level, right? There's a bunch of complex technical expertise that you have to bring to the table.
So in your ideal kind of collective, let's call it collective rather than committee, and you seem to suggest that it's quite good if these people understand each other and that they don't necessarily conflict. But does that mean that their differences, rather than their similarities, is a plus
100%.
in this world?
100%. I think this is the challenge, right? There's a need for very different people to come together to collaborate. Yeah, the engineer, the artist, the biologist, the whatever, right? And what I'm saying is that to start with, there's this bucket of information, which is our reality, which is everything around us, which we kind of have to understand in a similar way. We don't have to understand it exactly the same way, but in a similar way. And then once we have that base layer,
so you have
everyone
to buy
has their own.
You have to buy into the basic framework.
Yeah, you have to kind of some basic. I would say some basic truths about there's physics, like some pretty basic stuff, right? That is not always given on every project I ever worked on.
Well, lots of companies have a CEO who looks after the money and a creative director who looks after the kind of creative agenda, just say.
Yeah.
That's completely opposite to what you're talking about. But in this world that you're describing, which I hope I'm taking you with us in this conversation, but in this world, the architect is not the supremo of the whole situation. Presumably the architect is just one of these people in the group. Or is the group feeding the architectural practice? Are you asking the entire process of design and production by architects' offices to radically change, to incorporate this way of thinking?
I think the architecture or design is easy if you ignore kind of the complexity of our reality, right?
Which is what most people do.
Most people do, and this is why we end up with things which are end up being more expensive than they should be, more polluting than they should be, more damaging than they should be, you know, and definitely not circular, definitely not regenerative. And so I think in some degrees, and I'm not saying architects, but I think all of us have failed. I think we have failed to be good stewards of this planet. You know, and that's just an observation, I think, that, you know, I got to, and so yes, let's do things differently. But I'm not saying I have the solution. What I'm saying is we should iteratively try out different things and constantly have this feedback loop where we go and see whether this is still in line with what we're trying to achieve. That's why it's so important to clearly articulate what it is we're actually trying to achieve, because then we can always go back and whatever the machine tells us or whatever someone else tells you, you can always go back and you can see, hey, does that bring me closer to my end goal or doesn't it, right? And that should be the...
Okay, I'll put the same line of thinking another way, that quite often in designing a project, I will look for a kind of rogue element, call it surreal or playful or somehow deliberately incompatible, that unlocks for me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but unlocks the design process by making a move which is unconventional.
Which is beautiful, I think.
For example, supposing you have an office building and we think it's too serious, and then you put a piano in the middle of one office and you put a slide, you know, a giant slide in the middle of a courtyard so that people going to work there. How does that kind of move fit within?
It fits perfectly. It's completely fine as long as your slide doesn't eat all the resources or, you know, isn't poisonous.
So is that like introducing
it's
an
great.
art object into the mix, or is it
No,
part of the mix? Or
I think
is
it's
it
part of the
extraneous?
process, right? It's part of the creative process. I mean, in general, you know, that's that's a given,
room.
I would say.
There is
right?
room for that kind of.
No, 100%. This is essential. Without this, we're going to end up in a really dystopian future where everything looks the same. We're almost there. I mean, it's
that's the concern that people will have, I think, is that it sort of tends, and I love because I'm just leading on to a slightly different aspect of it. I think what you're talking about comes close to the question of collective intelligence. And that by operating in a collective way, one can come up with more appropriate, more tuned. It's like kind of tuning the musical instrument before you play.
Exactly, and you still need the moment of awe and the irritation and the other thing, right? It's both and. I think it's not either or.
Do you think you could train? How would you alter the education of architects in that case?
Fundamentally, I think I would stop telling students that it's all on them, and, you know, they have to stand in front of a jury to explain their design, and you know, we are still too much focused on the individual. I think it's really not a good idea in these complex times to teach young people that, you know, it's all on you. You know, you have to be this genius who comes up with the idea, and then you have to defend it in front of these old people, you know, that tell you that this is not very good what you're doing, right? That's just not a good way of doing it. So I really like what the GSD is doing. There's not many universities in the world that have...
GSD, just explain for the public what
at Harvard,
the
the architecture school at Harvard, where you have an integrated course. Your project work has to be done between an architect, an urban designer, a landscape architect, and that's much closer to reality, right? Otherwise, we are training them in their bubble, and then we let them into the real world, and then they realize that this is very, very far away from, you know, how the real world operates. And then,
well, I was instrumental in setting up a school of architecture in London, which is called the London School of Architecture. And one of the ideas, one of the fundamental ideas of the London School of Architecture, or LSA, was that students would work in offices whilst being at the LSA. So in their the first year of their RIBA Part 2 course, they would work half the time in an office and half the time in the school. And they would do a project which was collective, usually 8 or 9 people in a group. But from what I saw, those projects were really led by the stronger students.
But this is why I'm saying it
And
shouldn't
the
be
other
8
ones
architects.
would just hide behind it and
100%.
just trot out without really understanding what was
Exactly.
going on.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't only put architects together. I would make one architect team up with one urban planner, with one
Right.
landscape architect, and that makes more sense.
Well, what you're describing is closer to the way that movies are made. Because you have the director, the actors, you have the sound guys, the cameraman, and kind of all the techie people involved, and it all has to work together. And everybody, the director isn't just the boss, because the director is looking to the various other members of the cast and crew to actually, but it all has to come together, just like the performance on a stage has to come together. It's not just the performer, it's all the people behind, and the costume designer, and the makeup, and
100%.
everything. And I think that's kind of anathema to most architectural kind of tradition in terms of the design process that we take in architecture.
Agreed. I think we are out of time.
We're almost out of time. But anyway, I think what you're telling us is extremely interesting and probably very informative for lots of people here. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.